Welcome to This Medical Life podcast. These are the stories of medicine with Steve Davis and Dr. Travis Brown. This is the story of the Artful Dodger. Dr. Travis Brown, I'd like to read you one of my text messages. Is that all right?
Excellent, yep.
It's one I sent to you on the 1st of February 2026 at 21:47. I said, "You should watch The Artful Dodger on Disney. It's like This Medical Life by Charles Dickens."
Yes, I remember you sending that. I remember that recommendation. I find it difficult to find good TV series and you sit down and watch it with the family. So I took that recommendation and I did watch it. And this is, we don't endorse or pretty much anything on This Medical Life, do we? But this will be one TV series that we absolutely will. I've enjoyed it. It's a medical drama set in the 1850s with amazing characters, but also medically accurate surgery and medicine of the time. And there is great care and detail put into the medicine and the surgery, even so that you can sit there as a doctor and appreciate it and try and work out, what condition is this? And I've been able to enjoy this with my family. And today we have the great privilege of talking to the creator, head writer, and actually go in a deep dive and tell us more about the TV series.
James McNamara is the creator, showrunner, head writer, and executive producer of The Artful Dodger, as well as being an associate professor in film and media studies at UC Santa Barbara. The Artful Dodger is an historical medical drama set in 1850s Australia with Jack Dawkins, the Artful Dodger from the world of Oliver Twist. Jack's a former pickpocket, now surgeon, who is reacquainted with old partner in crime, Fagin, who is keen for Jack to resume old habits. And James is our guest on This Medical Life podcast. James, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
James, we're interviewing you on This Medical Life to understand what we think is the masterful way in which you've weaved historically accurate medical procedures and theories of the 1800s within a glorious dramedy that's featuring characters we know and love from Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. In fact, the medical history is so solid, we want to start by asking you this. What came first, the idea of a surgeon character set in time, or the notion of wondering what characters like Jack and Fagin would have gotten up to post-Oliver Twist?
It's a great question. They both came together because when you think about professions that a former pickpocket could take at the particular time that he was alive, where very quick fingers would have been a benefit, surgery was the thing that immediately struck. At that time, pre-anesthesia, the great benefit of the skilled surgeon was the ability to operate at enormous speed. And so the thinking was that, well, if he's got incredibly quick fingers, he's a very bright guy, his criminal past has led him to be able to manage enormous stress, to outrun the Reaper in his day job, and to really enjoy the adrenaline and the thrill of that sort of life and death stakes. That combined with his very quick fingers might make him an ideal pickpocket and surgeon. And so there was an original piece of the pilot that we didn't have the capacity. We ended up not filming, which happens quite a lot. But I was originally going to connect Oliver Twist up with the first episode by showing how Jack was arrested, how he went to prison. And then in my iteration, I changed it so that the man he robbed the watch from, which happens in Dickens, was a naval surgeon called Captain Grimm, who we meet in episode 2 of the first series. And in my version of it, in the backstory we haven't seen in the... in fact, I'm not sure I've told anyone this backstory, so this might be an exclusive. The idea was that the Captain Grimm argued with the judge, saying, you can't hang this kid, he's really talented, and actually went and helped him break out of prison. and said there's a berth on the HMS Dolphin. If you want to join the Navy, be there at sort of the 11th bell and there's a future for you. And so for me, that's how Jack did it. And that was based on detailed research into, you know, who became surgeons at that time, and also how you became a naval surgeon at that time, and how the Navy also offered an opportunity to go in there. So the creative decision was part of the historical reality.
And also that virtuous role that some people have in our lives every now and then. That just like
Right.
almost like the hand of God, if you will, just sort of stepping in. I mean, the hand of devil as well, back in those times where someone could send you down the ladder.
Totally.
I was entranced. In fact, I mentioned this in the intro to our episode, but on the 1st of February at 21:47, I texted Travis, who's sitting next to me, saying, "You should watch The Artful Dodger on Disney. It's like This Medical Life by Dickens."
Oh, wonderful. I love that. That's great.
That is testament to just how well detailed it is. But before Travis takes you deep into the medical world, I mean, you've elevated the Artful Dodger. He was a secondary character in Oliver Twist. He fades away after he gets transported to Australia. He becomes your main protagonist. If you think back to your first time reading or watching Oliver Twist, was there anything about Jack Dawkins that connected with you in a way that got under your skin? Or is there something else at work that made you think this guy needs to be in a spotlight?
Getting under your skin's a really good way of phrasing it. When I read Oliver Twist for the first time, I remember really having to slog through it because I really dislike Oliver as a character, which is probably evident from the way I characterize him in the first series. I find him to be wet, boring, saccharine, and I think that he just gets a hand up wherever he's in trouble. And then to me, when the Artful Dodger and Fagin swagger onto the page, the whole novel becomes electric. And of course, at that time, Dickens was writing the novels sequentially. It was a method of writing that's very similar, actually, to television writing today. So while he's writing one chapter, he's editing the previous one and then planning the next one. And he's writing to these production deadlines. So all of his novels were released in chunks, and he could never go back and revise them. And to me, I rather like to think that Dickens discovered Dodger and Fagin, and all of a sudden the book became something quite different at the end. And we go into this high-stakes, action-packed criminal world down at the docks with Bill Sykes and Nancy and Fagin. And I love the fact that the Artful Dodger was really loquacious, was really proud of his profession. He's really proud of being a criminal, was really proud of being able to earn his own way in the world, and really stood up to Fagin. He's just full of piss and vinegar and guts. And so for me, I've always loved Dodger and Fagin. And then with Fagin, you know, I think that my version of Fagin is very different to Dickens's, in the sense that I think that there's a warmth to Fagin that I bring that I don't think Dickens does. And I really wanted to look at, well, what was Fagin's motivation for bringing these boys in other than just to use them to make money? And to me, I thought, well, what if Fagin had a really rough life on the street? And this was his way of trying to give these boys a future, something that he never had: a roof, a bed, a profession. And so to me, that was the kind of the first thing. And actually the first lines I think I sketched out back in 2016 were, you know, I hate Oliver Twist. I hate Oliver Twist too. And so that's where it came from.
Wow. I just want to pick up on Fagin because, I mean, he arrives in the first episode, but not immediately.
Yeah.
And we already get to meet Jack, the Artful Dodger. And as a viewer, the empathy is right there. I was looking forward to this amazing story now. There's going to be lots of conflict in his hospital. It's going to be joy. You've got a little bit of love interest. And then comes Fagin, who I love, but he appears as a fly in the ointment to what was going to be this beautiful story. Is that what good literature needs? Do we need that uncomfortable grain of sand that's just irritating to stop it just being a beautiful, smooth trajectory?
I think it's certainly necessary for drama. I think where drama and literature differ is that drama is founded inherently on conflict. Back to the earliest iterations we have of it in Aeschylus and Sophocles, it's about two different characters who want different things and clashing. And so to me, I imagined that Dodger would be torn between two worlds. On the one hand, having this criminal past that could get him hanged if it was uncovered, could have him disgraced and struck off as a doctor. And on the other hand, wanting and aspiring to this future that his criminal circumstances, poverty had never allowed him to. But because of the transition of medicine from surgery being sort of a trade to suddenly becoming a profession, suddenly enabled him to reach up into this gentlemanly world. And then when he falls in love with Belle, to reach up even further to an aristocratic world. And so to me, I see that I was motivated by the medieval idea of psychomachia, which is in drama where you take someone's internal dilemma and you dramatize that in two characters, the angel and demon, as it were. And so for me, Fagin's the devil on Dodger's shoulder and Belle's the kind of angel on his shoulder. They're both flawed. Fagin has good aspects to being the devil, and Belle has some flaws to being the angel. So for me, there's kind of a tug of war over Dodger's soul between the two of them. And to me, that just brings the drama, is that he's so close to making it, and then Fagin comes back and pulls him back into the past.
It is so beautiful to have these extra lenses that I can go back and rewatch Artful Dodger with. Although when you mentioned Fagin earlier and thinking about his backstory, almost like there's a parental sense that he has towards the orphans. I don't know if you actually said that, but that's what I intimated from the way you were talking.
Very much, yeah.
This is uncomfortable for me to admit as a parent, but parents often have this, they want to have this love, but they also are always fighting with their own selfish needs at the same time. It might be too long a bow. This could be something an undergraduate might write about, but there's something in which Fagin is stripping bare the truthful elements of parenthood.
I'm glad you picked that up. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm a father of two myself, and I became a father just after I wrote the pilot and before we made the series. And I think that's absolutely right. I think parenthood is a mixture of having to suppress your own personal needs in the service of something more altruistic. And for me, I find it fascinating to work with Fagin's character because he is an inherently selfish crook. And he's selfish because that's the way he's had to be to survive. He's had to be about number one because he can't trust anybody. And to survive on the streets of London, he had to put himself first. But he loves his son. He loves his son. And so he struggles with this mixture of altruism that comes from paternal love and pure selfishness that comes from his own kind of criminal history. And that to me is what makes Fagin's character so interesting to write, is that there is, again, this inherent tension within him. So to me, I'm really interested in how you take dramatic problems but explore them through a genre lens. And here you've got the dramatic problem of how do you be a good dad, and you're exploring it through the lens of, well, what if you're a Victorian pickpocket, right? And so I find that an interesting way to explore that question.
And now, shifting to the other one of those characters, Lady Belle Fox, or Lady Belle among most of us, a very strong female character lead. Can you tell us more about what she symbolises beyond the love interest within this story?
Absolutely. So Lady Belle is Dodger and Fagin, obviously I'm drawing from Dickens, although they're my own versions of Dickens, and the rest of the characters are creations of my own. And Belle is the lead character that I created. And she's based on my wife. My wife is a very brilliant professor of medieval literature. She got a PhD from Oxford. She did a brilliant postdoc afterwards, and she's the chair of an academic department. And I just thought, what would happen if my wife was told, you can't do your research, you need to go and host a tea party in a corset? And the response to that was kind of the genesis of Belle. And then, of course, Belle's become very much her own character and brought to life so wonderfully by the very talented Maya Mitchell. But Belle, to me, symbolizes the enormous injustice that was wrought upon brilliant women at that time, which, of course, is still being wrought. And she's inspired by the historical figure of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who I'm sure some of your listeners will be familiar with as the first woman who was ever qualified as a doctor in England. And Elizabeth Garrett Anderson was an extraordinary woman. She was very brilliant. She was completely dedicated to her dream of becoming a doctor. And she had the good fortune to have a very wealthy father who believed pugnaciously in her right to do it. And her life story is really fascinating in the way that she just forced her way through every obstacle to achieve her dreams. And so Belle is an exploration for me of what it would have felt like to be a really brilliant medical mind at that time, but to be told, no, you can't because you're a girl. And so for me, I think that Belle she's the most intelligent member of it. She's the most intelligent person, I think, in that town. She is a genius. And she has difficulties because she's a genius. There aren't many people that can speak to her on the level. She's also the governor's daughter and an aristocrat. She's basically a princess in that town. So everyone treats her as her rank, not herself. And Dodger's the first person that treats her as a person. And I think that Dodger's the first person who she can really call a true friend, who just treats her as Belle. And so to me, I really wanted to explore what it would feel like to be a really bright female medic at that time and suffering the prejudice that they did, but also having the class power to push her way through into her chosen profession.
There was three names that I wrote down when I was actually watching. One was Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, Dr.
Yes.
Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, and Dr. Emma Constance Stone. And that were the first US, English, and Australian women to force their way into the medical sort of establishment, so to speak. So yeah, that's why I sort of almost wanted to look at that. Lady Belle reminds me of those stories, which are just incredible stories that they had to force their way in. And again, also, I was wondering whether the stories, not that we can ever project where things are going, but whether she's going to hit that level of obstruction. Because again, we're halfway through second series. Well, I certainly am. And whether she's going to hit that proverbial wall that every woman at that time seemed to hit.
Look, I'd love it if we could get to the chance to do a third series. And if we do, maybe that's something we're going to explore. I think that for me, she's definitely Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, in particular, is a story that I used as research for Belle. Also, Elizabeth Blackwell too, and so to me, I feel like she is a dramatic way of trying to shed light on those stories. And I think that Belle. What I find interesting about writing Belle is that she has an enormous class power and wealth power that Dodger doesn't have. But inside the hospital, he has a gender power and a practical experience benefit that she doesn't have. So it kind of matches them. But then, of course, she has an extraordinary medical mind, and she's had the ability to have the kind of Oxford tutors that a man would usually have because of her family's wealth. And so it's the two of them together, I think, to make up a genius. And that's what I find really interesting in writing. And yes, certainly, I mean, I read Elizabeth Garrett Anderson's biography in detail when I was creating the character of Lady Belle, and I still refer to it too for granular information.
Is there any trauma that you end up carrying after you're writing stories that are based in a time that was so heavily patriarchal and misogynistic? Do you have to cleanse yourself, or do you have that lovely ability as a writer to dive in like a god, have the players play, and then move on?
I certainly wouldn't describe myself as a god, but no, it is. I use a Stanislavskian acting method when I write, so I'm feeling through the beats of each character. It is emotionally very draining to write the stories. I have to generate the emotion myself to write it truthfully. Of course, I can only ever approximate what it would have felt like, the injustice it would have felt like. I mean, I'm a very privileged, Oxford-educated white man in 2026 with a tenured professorship at an R1. I'm very privileged, so I don't have that experience. But I did grow up in a family of extremely brilliant women. My mother's an academic scientist. My wife is an academic. My cousin is an academic scientist. And so, I have seen the misogyny that still exists today and the injustice that sort of that generates. And then, of course, I have the opportunity to work with extraordinary collaborators in these characters with Maya Mitchell, Susie Porter, who plays Lady Jane, Lucy Rose Leonard, who plays Lady Fanny, Bridget Zingeni, who plays Rotti, and Viva Osoga, who plays Hetty. And so I have the ability to sort of learn from their lived experience and the way in which they feel through the characters too. So yes, it is, it takes something out of you to write it. And then you also bear an ethical responsibility, I think, to your cast, because the cast are going to have to go through those emotions when they play it. And so to me, that's something I particularly as the creative executive producer who's overseeing creative on the set, I feel really strongly about ensuring that the scenes must be purposeful. If you're asking an actor to go to a dark place, there's going to be a real reason for it. And then you should turn up, you should be there on the set. And if nothing else, just to show support, I think, for that journey and to respect that process. So it's certainly something that, yes, it is an emotional challenge to write at times. And I think it comes through in, I feel a sense of outrage and injustice that I hope carries through into Belle. But as I say, I do my best. I haven't experienced that haven't had that lived experience myself. So I try to honor it as best I can through careful research.
Adjacent to those themes, there's another one. There's a surprising exchange that took place in the first season when Lady Belle is chastising Red, an Aboriginal woman. She charges her with theft, to which Red replies, well, you lot are the greatest thieves around, or words to that effect. There are a few jibes at colonialism and dispossession that I've noticed across the two seasons. How do you get that balance right to avoid it becoming didactic and a morality play, but keeping it so we don't lose our suspension of disbelief? We're still in their world, but you're landing home some truths.
It's a great question, and it's challenging because what British colonial imperialist policies did to our Indigenous brothers and sisters is horrifying. And the only way to, I think, authentically tell that story would require a different genre structure to Dodger, something like The Nightingale, for example. And so the question of how do you truthfully tell stories of colonialism where you're ensuring the inclusivity of First Nation stories, you're not sort of brushing aside the horrors, but you're also landing a Dickensian tone in a show that is often considered a comedy. And the way I can do it is because I've had the great privilege of working with my colleague Miranda Tapsell, who is an extraordinary multi-award-winning Indigenous writer and actor and creator and producer. And so Miranda played the character of Red, who's the character you mentioned in that scene. And Miranda was also the Indigenous consultant and a writer on season 1, and then was a writer on season 2 as well. And I've also had the privilege on season 2 of working with Dr. Blaine Welsh, who is our Indigenous consultant on season 2 and a theatre maker himself. And so Miranda and Blaine have really helped to ensure that we tell the story authentically, and also given us strong guidance and parameters on how to tell that story authentically within the genre space. Miranda has an extraordinary talent and is also, a Dickens fan like I am. And so from the start, Miranda knew the tone that we were looking for. And so I feel very grateful to have had the opportunity to work with First Nations creatives and advisors, which has helped, I think, to land that. It's also something that's important to Maya is to not just brush away Belle's participation in colonialism, to own that and confront that. So I don't know if we've done it right, but we've certainly done our best. And I'm grateful to Miranda and Blaine for their expert guidance in doing that.
Well, for what it's worth, I've been reviewing theatre for 30 years and I've got a very fine hair trigger when it comes to stepping over the mark beyond the story to becoming didactic, and that was not triggered. So,
oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. You can't do that. I agree with you. There's nothing worse than didactic drama, and so for me, it's really important to ensure it's within those character stories, and that was part of building the story from the start. That was part of the reasoning for characters like Red, and is to ensure that we are telling diverse and inclusive stories that represent all aspects of life at that time. Especially if you want to be authentic with Dickens's embracing absolutely of the grittiness of a situation. Absolutely. My final question before I tag team to Travis to take us into the medical realm is period television shows. From what I've heard, they're notoriously hard to get greenlit. Did you have any concerns before you pitched this that it might be dismissed because it's set in the 19th century? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Right. In fact, it amazes me that this show has been made. I mean, it's such a niche. When you try to sum up the genre of this show, it's a comedy, it's a medical drama, it's a romance, it's a buddy crime caper. It's basically to have the opportunity to have written something that's essentially my peculiar mind on a page is a staggering privilege. I feel deeply grateful to Disney who commissioned the show, and I'm grateful to the producers who got it over the line. There was a lot of work done by Sony Curio, Sony Playmaker, to get the show made, and then there's been an enormous support from the team at Disney Australia, who have really believed in the show, and the team at Disney LA, and the team at Sony Pictures and Sony International Television. So the show's had really strong champions at the studio and production companies, and I feel very grateful, because it is, it's a niche and quite eccentric show in its tone, but it's found a broad viewership, and which I feel very grateful for.
And I think it was 2016, wasn't it, when this really got on the road with writing?
Yes. Yeah, I started writing it. I had my first meetings on this at the end of 2016, and I created the show in 2017. Wrote the pilot in 2018, 19, and then we got picked up to scripts, I think, at the end of 2021. We wrote through 22, shot 23, and then, and so here we are into 2026. So it's been, it's nearly a quarter of my life has been spent in this world, and what a lovely place it has been to be. So I'm very grateful to Sony Disney for believing in this show.
Yes, and your next career could be marathon runner, because you've already got the mental fortitude for that.
Well, it certainly requires a wise friend of mine named Jeremy Dicker, who's the managing editor of International Intrigue. It's a wonderful publication. Said to me that every job has its challenges, and the challenge of this profession is managing uncertainty and managing decades of not sure whether something will land. And every profession has its difficulties, and this one's ours.
Yeah. All right, let's pause, take a quick breath. By the way, it's been a very inspiring show. While we sat here, I've pickpocketed Travis's wallet. So
brilliant.
It's a very practical show as well.
I'm very glad to hear that. David Thewlis steals things from around the set.
Oh, really?
David's a method actor. So it was Jeffrey Walker, the setup director's encouragement. He'd nick stuff from around the set. Which I always love. I think it's quite fun. I haven't lost my phone yet, but you never know. I mean, again, he's a truly lovely man. I adore him, and so yes, he can steal whatever he wants.
Let's return in a moment and continue into medical stream of thought.
Sure.
We continue our discussion with James McNamara now. This time we're going to focus on the research done for this series. And I think this is fitting, James. Here, at the time of recording, there is thunder crashing outside.
Oh, I love that. It's very gothic.
It is. So
I don't know, when you get to episode 6 of season 2, it's a thunder and lightning episode. So I love that. I love that sort of tone.
Yeah, well, that's what we're in that right now. Why did you take so much care to get the medicine, to get the surgery right for this series, given you probably could have performed that and play acted it through, and most audience members wouldn't have known the difference?
It's a really good question. I think the first thing is it just comes from my instinct. I wouldn't know how to do it differently. I did my, when I finished university, I was very lucky to get a scholarship to go to Oxford, and I did my PhD in anatomical and surgical ideas in 17th through 19th century English literature. So, probably 40% of the thesis was an original claim in the intellectual history of anatomy and surgery. So I'd had the luxury of having spent years sitting in the Bodleian Library reading all of these old texts, and I had the great privilege to study with extraordinary minds at Oxford, where I learnt how to do this research in a way that can be done quickly, and I know how to locate things. And so for me, it was that was a natural process, it came from a scholarly background, and that's the kind of what I would consider to be an acceptable standard of research. But I think there are two other importances. Firstly, this show my most difficult job is balancing the tone. The show has to balance being a tense medical drama with being a big swelling romantic story, and then also a hijinks and hilarity kind of crime heist show. And I think that having real stakes in the medicine importantly grounds the tone. And one of the reasons I find it so fascinating to write medical stories as a dramatist is that medicine is the profession which confronts life and death like no other. It confronts pain and suffering. It confronts great joy and relief. And so to me, I felt a sense of responsibility to get it right. Really, I have enormous respect for the medical profession, and I wanted to get it right. And then additionally, frankly, the history was stranger than anything I could make up. It licensed me to really do some very eccentric and bizarre cases that otherwise I think people would have called bullshit on. I've got a case in the second series where there's a fellow pissing out of his own belly button because his urachus never closed up, and they were able to remove a bladder stone straight through it. That would seem ludicrous, but I could say, look, here's the Lancet from 1855, and there is the case. And so all of the cases that we do on this show are drawn directly, almost beat for beat at times, from published cases, largely from the Lancet, some from the Australian Medical Journal, from a period of about 1850 to about 1860. Sometimes we'll blur the time by about 10 years, but we try to stay pretty close to it. And then when we depart from strict realism, we know why we're departing and to what extent. So my rule is we shouldn't go anywhere more than about 15% away from the truth. So I think it's important to ground it. I think it's important for the drama, and I think it's important just as an act of respect to the history and to the medical profession.
There was actually the second episode, we've already mentioned it, with the naval captain, where he said in the boat to a man who was dying, he said, hold his hand and see him into the next life. And that actually sort of struck home, because I'm going, where did that – I don't know if you'll know where that came from, but that's quite a profound statement to have. Was that just a writer's room kind of thing, or was that actually come from somewhere?
I don't – that was written by my friend and colleague and mentor, Andrew Knight, wrote that episode. I'm not sure where Andrew drew that from, but a lot of it is drawn directly from the cases. So in the first episode where Charlie they try out ether for the first time, when he wakes up and says, "Don't cut me, dog," don't cut my leg off. That's drawn from Squire's actual case, where the fellow who was put under for the first time by Squire so that Liston could operate on him woke up and said, "Actually, I don't want you to do the operation," after it had already been done. So we do take a lot of granular bits and pieces from the cases. That one in particular, I'm not sure. I think it was something that Andrew, being a brilliant writer, brought into it. And one thing we've always tried to really lean into, excuse me, is to use the medical stories really to drive character story as much as to drive procedural plot. And so for this, it's about about Jack first learning how to deal with death as a doctor, and Bell then learning how to do it in turn. But I agree, I love that line. It's beautiful and testament to Andrew Knight. There's a reason why he's one of our greatest ever screenwriters, and it's right there in that line.
So are you having to do more research now, or do you feel you've got sort of the research basis? Because clearly you're doing lots of reading in the 1850s, 1860s sort of medical journals. Is that continuing? Are you looking, or do you feel like you've got the basis?
In fact, I'm going to pull from my shelf. I just got this lovely beast the other day, the Bruitt System of Modern Surgery, the first edition. Yes, I do a lot of research. The first season was really intensive because I was not only researching the cases, but I was researching the broader currents, the broader historical currents that were occurring in medicine at that time, specifically the shift from sort of natural history into experimental physiology that occurred around the middle of the 19th century, which made a profound difference in surgery, the shift towards the use of ether and carbolic acid, which enabled abdominal surgery for the first time. And those historical turning points, I think, are really good for a dramatist to work with, because even though you wouldn't think there'd be people against anesthesia, I assure you there were. And so you can have people on either side of the debate with life and death and pain and suffering being the stakes. So a lot of contextual research then, and also research into specific nature of the anatomy theatres. I went to the Hunterian Museum at the Royal College of Surgeons in London and read sort of blood-spattered books and looked at all the wonderfully disgusting exhibits. And then for each season, last season, season 2, I read about 1,000 pages of Lancets before I started, because as you can tell, I've got a very active social life. But I find it fascinating. I'm curious. I love it's intellectually interesting to me. So to me, I serve in the role. One of my other hats I wear is I'm the historical consultant on the show. I would otherwise have to have somebody who could do that. And so I do that work, and then I work with Professor Ross Knight, who's a surgeon and a professor of medicine, to actually practically recreate things. So yes, lots of journal articles from the 1850s. And I'm grateful to the Lancet, who let us use their name in the show.
Wow. Now, have you found anything surprising that you can't use or haven't been able to use yet? Or is there anything that's, I'd love to put that in, but I can't quite do that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I write these long sort of tables of cases for the writers with sort of links to the articles. And there are some that, I think there was one that I wrote last season, there's no way that could ever be portrayed on screen. Really grotesque stuff like people that need disimpacting after their bowels get stopped up by eating too many rotten potato skins. Appalling gynecological injuries from incompetent surgeons. There's really interesting surgeries on the malar bone, like cancers, which would be fascinating to do, but face surgery is quite hard to demonstrate. Also stuff relating to syphilis. I don't think nose is rotting off.
Yeah.
Like we can joke about it like we do in the first series, but actually doing that surgery is quite confronting, I think. So certainly things that involve particular levels of gore, comfort level disgust. And then also there's a practical question as to, the prosthetics team we have led by Rachel Skane are extraordinary and make the most amazing things. But the more complicated you get, like face surgery, the price tag just goes up and up. And so we've got to be mindful of that too, just to manage budget concerns.
I will just note, as the non-doctor here, that I actually watch and enjoy Artful Dodger, and my eyes are closed about 20% of the time. Just so you know.
Well, that's a testament to my friend and colleague Jeffrey Walker, who was the setup director on season 1, who gave us things like the wound cam inside Charlie's leg. And
Yes.
But I think it's important. There's an extent to which we had to show how horrifying it was. And I try to do that with black comedy quite a lot, where we have profs spraying blood in people's faces. I'm very proud of having kept Fatums, the hospital cat, eating a finger under a table. That's a moment dear to my heart. It's a career highlight for me. So in the second season, we toned down some of the more visible gore and did some more kind of medical cases. But I then tried to make the medical cases as grotesque as possible.
Now, you've chosen a time with the anesthetics, the ether. Now, did you have to do much research in that area?
I did a lot of research. What I was trying to do is to find the primary source evidence, which I did. There's records by Squire, who administered the ether for Liston to operate on. So I read all the published journal articles about it. We found, the schematics for the actual ether inhaler. And then I work with an extraordinary property master, Troy Dignan, who's, I think, the best property master in the country. And he and his team built us 19th century surgical equipment that is to spec accurate, that's usable. That hospital set is a 360-degree shootable working two-story building. Every drawer is full of period-accurate medical equipment in case the actors open it. You walk into that place and you are walking back in time into a working hospital. It is truly staggering. It was built by Matthew Putland, our first production designer, then re-envisaged by Nick Dare, our second season production designer. So it's a combination of deep historical research by me and then very practical research by our props team and production design team to get things as accurate as possible.
Now, you've mentioned Robert Liston a few times. Again, he's one of our favourites. The fastest knife in the West End, and there's even stories. I'm not quite sure if it was him of getting the
300% mortality.
The 300.
Rate.
I know that was him. There was one where they actually were sawing, and the saw got stuck in someone's bone and everything like that. And it's like sawing wood, and it's just. Do you find yourself going down the rabbit hole with much of these characters that you pretty much are just reading about? Well, not characters; they're real life people.
I keep wanting to go to my shelves. Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. I read one person that was really important, I think, for understanding what it felt like to be a doctor at the time is Sir Astley Cooper. I've got his collected lectures, his biographies. I read that. In the Hunterian College, I read a handwritten diary written by a grave robber at the time to learn about how we do grave robbery. I had like a PowerPoint presentation on how to rob a grave in the 1850s, which we needed for sort of the third episode, if I recall rightly. And then Liston, yes, and then Elizabeth Garrett, of course, as well. And so for me, the stories, the history provides you with stories that are so interesting and so poignant. They are better than anything. And then you obviously we dramatize them, but the material you get from these people is really remarkable. And I think for me, one of the things that I really took away was the carnival kind of feeling of being in those public operating theatres that were theatres in a way. The betting on how quickly one could take the leg off. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we took 28 seconds directly from Liston's record, and that opening case is based on Liston's own record of taking a leg off in 28 seconds. And so we heightened that a little bit for drama, where we've got people with beers and pipes, but it was not too far from the truth. I researched John Keats, the poet, was as you all know, I'm sure, was trained as a doctor, and so a lot of the descriptions of the disgusting gore I took from Keats's records of what it was like to train as a doctor as well. So yeah, I do go down the rabbit hole with research, but I'm a nerd, I'm an academic, so I love it.
You're also a huge fan of Shakespeare. I've heard you say that publicly. He predates these procedures by a couple of 100 years. Can you imagine what his works would have been like had he known about this level of medical practice? Could you imagine him including more of that to play to the pit?
I'm sure. I mean, Shakespeare's theatres, I mean, firstly, the theatre in Shoreditch, and then later the Globe in Southwark. I mean, the Globe in particular was right next to bear baiting rings and brothels. I mean, it was a place where when you read people like the theatre historian Andrew Gurr, for example, if you read E.K. Chambers on Shakespeare's stage, these were environments that were closer to rock concerts or football games than the theatre today. People from all walks of society, they were drinking beer, they were getting into fights, they were picking people up, they rioted afterwards. The middle class people who lived around them were constantly protesting because the 2,000 people spilling out of the Globe Theatre half drunk and getting into brawls woke them up at night. So I think that he would have loved that. And Shakespeare's company also used special effects in a really interesting way. We know from research by people like Tiffany Stern and Farah Karam Cooper that they were potentially using animal organs as the organs on stage. We know that they shot fireworks back and forth along cables across the top, which actually led to the Globe burning down. I think he would have been all over it. I think we loved it, particularly the guy that wrote Titus Andronicus, which is more disgusting than I've ever written. There's a stage direction in King Lear, which I think is it's Gloucester somebody pulls out someone's eye and stamps on it. I think Shakespeare would have loved this.
We're getting the thunder sound effects that Shakespeare would have used for the Tempest.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Rumbling away. And to me, so Shakespeare is my favorite writer. The reason I wanted to do this job is because I fell in love with Shakespeare at the Globe when I was 19 years old. And, I read Shakespeare. That's my expertise, such that it is. As an academic, I work on screen adaptations of Shakespeare. And so I'm always reading Shakespeare when I'm writing this. We're directly using Shakespearean genre structure in our writers' rooms. I work with a very bright room of writers. I mean, for example, we're drawing on Much Ado About Nothing for genre structure. We're drawing on Romeo and Juliet. We're drawing on Benedict and Beatrice. Quite often, this is a bit like Lear or Macbeth. And so to me, the tone of Dodger is drawn really from Shakespeare's capacity to mix the high and the low. And that's one of the things I love about his writing. And so really Shakespeare is probably almost more influential on this project than Dickens. Yeah. Obviously, I'm writing at a very different level to Shakespeare or Dickens, but still, they're my heroes.
Which comes first with regards to the story or the medical condition, or is it just sort of they come together?
It really sort of depends on what we need. This is also the answer that I think that the Nick and the team on writing the Nick gave as well when I've spoken to them is it depends on what you need. In the first season, I think we were more structuring stories around the medicine. Certainly, to me, the first season was about building up a series of advancements that would allow Dodger to do Bell's aortic aneurysm surgery at the end, which included things like ligating arteries, anesthesia, antiseptics, and the carbolic acid development. And so each sort of medical procedure was building up ultimately to that climax. as we moved into the second season, it sort of just started to shift towards more what do we need for the character story you want to tell. And so then we would start to sort of draw from my list of here are all the various grotesque things we could do. Okay, that's good. We want an episode about this. Okay, we'll bring that in because it has a thematic significance. And so what I neglected to mention before, of course, is that after I've done the research, we then reconstruct these surgeries with my friend and colleague, Professor Ross Knight, who's Andrew Knight's brother, actually, who's our medical consultant. And so I will come in with all the history, and then Ross and I will sit and go, we'll reverse engineer how it probably would have looked like in the 1850s. And then Ross and I will sit with Thomas and Maya, who, of course, played Thomas Brody Sangster, and Maya Mitchell, who played Belle and Jack, and then with Nicholas Burton, who plays Sneed, Vivi Owasoga, who plays Hetty, and Kim Gingell, who plays Prof. And we will spend probably 2 hours rehearsing in detail with the prosthetics team to really do that operation. So I would suggest that I think that we have probably done 1850s surgery as accurately as you could do it outside of an actual body in the 1850s. There's an enormous attention to detail. The actors are very focused on it. Maya Mitchell always, and I really admire this, wants to know everything that Belle knows. So we spend time with old physiology books, reading them through, going through them together. Thomas wants to know exactly how the surgeries would have worked, in terms of hand movement, etc. So there's a real commitment to accuracy from the whole team across every department. And I think that comes into then helping to tell the story, the medicine of the story, then to bring it back to your question, fold in together where the doctors are under stress because the actors are literally doing a surgery on stage. I have started some of my days with my hands in a highly realistic cadaver demonstrating what I remember of how a historical procedure works to our wonderful actors. And it's, you're there, you're in a 19th century hospital with the sawdust and a body on a table.
Believe me, I feel like I'm there at the moment.
Sorry about that. I've got quite a strong stomach, I think.
Yes, which I have not. I actually did go to train to be a St John's ambulance cadet when I was 12.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
I only lasted there a few times, and I mainly went because at halftime you could have a Fanta from the Fanta machine.
No, that's a very good reason. There's a lot to be said for a Fanta.
All right, that helped me clear my mind. We have one last quick breather and come home with some very specific medical questions.
Sure. I look forward to it.
In our final segment, we want to discuss some of the medicine in general terms, of course. We don't want any spoilers for our audience. This is not a question many people get asked, but what is it like to be an expert on 19th century medicine?
Well, I think I've demonstrated the single way of commercially monetizing that specialty. When I was at Oxford, the president of my college said, "This is the most arcane and inapplicable doctoral topic I've ever heard of," and I was like, "I'll show you." No, look, it's really fun. I am a method writer in the sense that when I am writing the show, I will only read things written prior to 1860. I mean, obviously emails and things, but I only read, and I read a lot. I only read things prior to 1860. I like to try and, I experiment with using a dip pen to understand how they would have written. I like to write with candles, and it's hopefully not an affectation. It's part of getting my head into what it would have felt like. So I will read Gray's Anatomy from the 1850s to understand what they understand, right? To understand that physiology and to really try to know what it felt like as much as I can, so I can then try to bring that across accurately on the page. But then also, in my role as the executive producer on the set, a lot of my work is dramaturgical with the actors. So we will sit and we'll talk through the scenes and beat by beat. And, I need to be able to explain in really concrete detail exactly what these procedures are, what the medicine is, what they understood, how it differs from what we are, not only with the actors, but then with all of the departments that are involved in it. So it requires me being very across it so that I can explain it, in clear terms to multiple different specialties. And I find that fascinating. To me, if I had an ability for the humanities, had I had an ability for the sciences, I would absolutely have chosen to have a medical profession. I find it consumingly interesting. And so, to me, it's just, I'm very interested in it. And 19th century medicine's a very interesting shift of sort of medical cultures that fascinates me.
I just want to insert one footnote. You do a lot of writing on planes. I imagine that's not by candlelight.
No, it's not. They frown on that. But I do love writing on planes. I've written the finales of both seasons actually on planes back and forth. But I live in Montecito, just up the coast from LA. I've written both finales on the plane, and it's helpful because you're strapped down. There's a button you can push for liquor and coffee, so it's sort of an ideal situation for a writer, really.
Now, you're actually having to span old and new medicine, and that sort of creates this tension. Like, how do you manage doing that? Actually,
it's to me that's what makes it really work. When you're creating a television show, what you're looking to do is to find a story world that has big kind of pressure points. Gender pressure points, class pressure points, geographical pressure points. And here in the hospital, there's a huge changing of the guard between the old method of surgery, which is considered professionally to be more like a trade, and was really a kind of butchery where the surgeons were proud of the fact that their aprons could stand up because the hardened gore would mean that they could just literally stand on the ground. And moving then into a culture where medicine moved away from kind of a form of developed butchery into a highly scientific process. At that time, you would have everyone who was really good at surgery often came from a non-traditional medical background. They didn't have university degrees. They hadn't graduated from high school. Often they were smart people who hadn't had those opportunities. And so the physicians who were still at that point diagnosing people by letters, for example, and not properly examining women because of ideas of sort of chivalrous delicacy, these two cultures clashed. And you had these guys that could suddenly step up into being kind of these gentleman doctors who'd come from the wrong side of the medical tracks. As well as that, you've got people who really disagreed on whether anesthesia was a good thing or not. There was a strong pushback on it. It was seen as cheating. It was seen as something that might turn doctors into barbarians because they weren't having to be conscious of the pain of the patient. It was seen as being irreligious. The idea of suffering as being the way that God communicates sinfulness is obviously taken from the Bible. We can see it in the work of John Donne and the early Christian fathers. So there's a lot of pushback about the use of ether, for example. And then also the kind of increasingly scientific advancements of medicine, which allowed then for abdominal surgery to happen for the first time. That was a big shift too. Previously, surgeons really had just been able to lop limbs. The motto on our hospital on the outside, I can't remember the Latin, but it's the Latin for "we cut legs" or "we cut limbs." But that's what they did. They cut limbs. And when they had anesthesia and when they developed early kind of antiseptics and carbolic acid, it allowed them to go into the abdomen for the first time to do more complex surgeries that were in turn the result of a developing understanding of scientific physiology. And so it's this great turning point. And that means that on one side, you've got Prof, who's a blustering old drunk, who, to be honest, comes from a culture where he probably had to drink to get through the horrors of his day, right? He's having to lop people's limbs off constantly. It's pretty rough. On the other side, you've got Bell, who's a brilliant scientific mind, and Dodger, who's trying to push medicine to new frontiers. And in the middle, you've got Sneed, who's a politician who's playing both sides for his own advancement. Yeah. So it's a uniquely effective dramatic structure to use that turning point, I think, in history.
We have mentioned your hospital before and the spectators watching. I am curious, we know, us learned This Medical Life people and our listeners, that it was a spectator sport, so to speak, those early days of surgery. Did you get any raised eyebrows from the studio for including something like this? Did you have to explain that this was real and not just one of your fantasies?
Well, I think the studio has always been very supportive of the show and what it is, and I think that the ability to just describe the historical realities has certainly been helpful. One thing Disney doesn't usually allow smoking on screen. They generously allowed us to have characters smoking on screen in The Artful Dodger because it was relevant to the time. They're really Disney and the production company Sony Curio actually have really been invested in the historical realism. And, I had the opportunity to talk through the history with them is really helpful. And they're very supportive of of telling this story accurately. And that's a note that I get. Are we sure that this is historically accurate? And I'll be, we can then have a conversation about, here's the journal article and here's where we're coming from. And so, yeah, and we were also, of course, in designing that hospital, which was designed initially by Matthew Putland, and then it was built actually in Parramatta outside of Sydney in a big car warehouse. And then we actually broke it all down and moved it onto our main studio location, which is at Cullen Park, about 30 minutes drive away. And then Nick Dare, our production designer, and then Cameron Walsh, our series producer, concertinaed this 2-story hospital through a regular door frame and rebuilt it inside this enormous sort of old church hall, which was an act of truly staggering ingenuity to do that.
Keyhole
and then
surgery.
Recreated it all. It was really architectural keyhole surgery. So I know that, both Matt and Nick, their teams do enormous amounts of historical research as well. That we were using original hospital plans. My research for the hospital originally was based on, there were lots of annual reports submitted to the legislature in the 1850s. So I actually based Port Victory on Hobart, which was originally where we were going to film, and we then ended up making its own kind of fictional town set somewhere in New South Wales. But that hospital and everything in it and the roles in it is taken from my reading of the hospital reports of what happened this year and what was in the storerooms. And so from my standpoint and then from the design standpoint, it is as accurate as it can be within the frameworks of needing to be a working set. And so, Disney's been an incredible partner on that. That's a significant ask to make of a studio, and they've really supported us.
I was surprised that this was actually created in Australia. Is there a reason, like you're living in the United States, is there a reason that you actually filmed it in Australia?
Well, I think it's an inherently Australian story. Firstly, obviously transportation is something that Dickens himself wrote about. And then Ike Solomon, who was the real criminal that was the inspiration for Fagin, was himself transported to Tasmania. And so there was a natural Australian connection for Dickens. And I think the other thing that interests me about it is it allows, Australia at that time still had class systems. The governors were still trying to set up a kind of class system, but it was inherently much more egalitarian than London could be because of its isolation. We just needed doctors. We just needed lawyers. And so people who could do the job could just, could get that job, even if they wouldn't have had the class background to do it. So for me, setting it in Australia has always been important and justified by the history and the text, but it also allows for a really different lens on a Dickensian story. You can't hide the bright sun when we're filming. It is bright, it's hot, and that's a very different tonal aesthetic to the gloom of Victorian London. And in fact, we originally considered shooting flashback sequences in London, and it's frankly just too hard to shoot that kind of gloom in Australia. It's really difficult when you're shooting in Sydney in summer to bring London fog. At times we have enormous kind of shade screens that we bring over the actors, but even still, you can't hide the sun in Australia. And I love that. The one thing I do feel really strongly about is the actors go through a lot to film in that heat. Our costumes are also period accurate. Particularly, Lady Belle and Lady Fanny, Maya in particular has to do a lot of running in season 2. It's really, it's on my mind that it's a difficult, hot, unpleasant job to wear those costumes, and beautiful as they are, stunning costume designed by Marion Boyce on the first season by Xanthi Hubel. It's a challenge, and they talk about the fact that they are able to feel what it would have felt like to wear this heavy wool in summer, which they still did at the time. But it's something I'm conscious of as an executive producer, and knowing that my actors are going through it. I want to try and do what I can to make them more comfortable.
I don't know. I think it's fair. You're a Stanislavskian writer, so they can have that Stanislavskian method acting themselves.
Well, I do. I try to lead from the front. So when I'm asking my actors to do something disgusting, I'll do it. David had to eat onions this season, so I filmed myself eating an onion.
Okay.
Actually, it had nothing to do with Tony Abbott. I didn't even know that it happened, but apparently there was a thing there. But then Troy Dingyan, our property master, bless him, ate every single different type of onion to find the least offensive one.
Oh my God.
And then poor Maya asked Maya to stick her finger into Uriah Heep's belly button, into this magnificently disgusting prosthetic, which she describes as the worst thing I've ever asked her to do. So I did that on set myself. I stuck my finger in the belly before Maya did. But that leads me to costume. When I have said, I'll wear full Victorian frock coat on set if necessary. But Maya has said, well, then, we have to wear corsets. So you need to wear a corset if we shoot the third season, and I get to do it do it up as tightly as I want. And so I've agreed in front of the press to do that. So that may be, if we get to do a third season, that may be in my future.
Well, at least you've got plausible deniability when they get photos of you dressed that way.
Oh, true.
James, our final question we ask every guest on This Medical Life. What advice do you have for GPs and surgeons listening in? And I would like to ask you that question. Are there any takeaways a modern practicing doctor might have from your reflection on the mindset, the plight, the interaction with the public that your surgical characters had?
It's a great question. I mean, I feel a sense of real humility suggesting that I should advise doctors anything, to be honest. But I am the beneficiary of the extraordinary magic that doctors weave. All three members of my family, my wife and daughters, are alive today because of the emergency interventions of doctors in the past 5 years. I have nearly lost every one of the people I care most of in the world, and they have been saved by extraordinary surgeons, by extraordinary physicians, in circumstances where in any other time, and today even outside of having access to extraordinary hospitals like Cedars-Sinai, who saved my daughter's life, I would have been at funerals. And so to me, I have walked, in fact, I wrote part of season 2 from the pediatric ICU, and I have looked into the darkness of contemplating the loss of a child or a spouse. And then I have felt the staggering relief of knowing that they're going to be okay, and only going to be okay because that doctor was inspired to help people and has worked long hours of study and works long nights and bears that stress, that emotional stress, that physical stress. Surgeons awake for 16 hours. I feel deeply and profoundly grateful to have the opportunity to tell those stories and to try and reflect the emotional aspect that I know that doctors have to turn off. A good friend of mine is the former chair of pediatric surgery at Columbia, and he says you've got to be very empathetic walking into the room, and the minute you go into the operating room, all of a sudden you've got to be a robot. I have so much admiration for doctors. And so to me, if I can show what it feels like to suffer as a patient, as a loved one of a patient, and to know how grateful patients are for the interventions of doctors, then I think I've done my job. This story really is a love letter to the medical profession, to doctors and nurses who they are fighting the reaper, and they're fighting the good fight. And my only advice is just to say thank you, and to note that we're big fans of doctors on the Artful Dodger, and we hope we do a good job in telling your stories.
Well, I think we both agree that you do. James McNamara, thank you for you and everyone around you for crafting such a majestic bit of entertainment that's thought-provoking. And in the words of a certain Dickens character, please, sir, may we have some more?
Well, I'd love to do some more if we get that chance. Thank you so much. I'm very lucky to have an extraordinary team. This is a team sport, and this show is the product of very many hands. So thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Thank you very much, James.
That was great.
Deeply.
I had such a lovely conversation. I wish we'd been having a beer while.
Oh, I know. I'm dying to see your library. That's killing me. That's sitting there. I'm trying to get through. Oh, thank you. Oh man.
I've got a whole bunch here. I've got first edition Dickens is in there, and I've got my Grey's Anatomy.
It even looks like you got a Sternberg's there, which is modern medicine pathology almost there. The red ones with the black ones. Yeah. Oh, yes, my goodness. Dolan's medical...
I do my best to make it as accurate as I can.
Like off the record, the only medical thing I've been able to watch is Scrubs.
I love Scrubs.
I love Scrubs, but I haven't been able to watch like the Grey's Anatomies or the ER or everything. Because effectively it was drama just happened to be set in the hospital. Like, because in their scripts, they would always write medical blah, 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 or, medico sort of doctor speak and everything like that. Whereas yours is actually inherently written into it because it's part of the story. And so
it has to be. It has to be. Yeah,
I have loved it. So
thank you.
It's I'm sitting there, got my own list on the side. Oh, you could do the Anthrax, where they actually did the Anthrax. Sort of the 1850s was where they actually talked about actually being able to discover that people were putting it at other people's meals, and actually sort of the first discovery of anthrax was the scientific, in the 1850s.
We've got one. We do arsenic in. I don't know if you've seen the arsenic episode yet. And then we're about to do cholera. We've got Jon Snow's cholera. So we take that pretty much beat by beat from how Snow figured out cholera, and then again the arsenic was drawn. Sometimes we stitch together a number of different cases, but one thing I'm really fortunate to do is I work with the best actors in the world who, if they smell bullshit in a scene, if they're not understanding the medicine, they will push it. And we work really collaboratively together. And I have at times where Thomas and Maya have said, the medicine, I don't understand this medicine. And if I don't understand, the audience won't. And it's because there's a problem in the scene. And I have sat down with Thomas and Maya, we've recrafted it. We get Dr. Ross on the phone. Every script, Dr. Ross looks like, we call him Dr. Ross because he's, I don't know, that's what we do. But, Russ is an extraordinary support too, because he makes sure that we stay within the boundaries of the practically plausible as well as historically plausible. So, it's thank you. That means a lot to us. We really try. So
I know. Again, it's beautifully done.
This Medical Life is recorded in the Talked About Marketing Studios in Adelaide. For show notes and more information about the podcast, visit thismedicallife.com.au. You can contact the hosts on social media. Dr. Travis Brown can be found on X. His username is @Dr. Travis Brown. That's Dr. Travis Brown. And Steve Davis can be found on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/in/The Real Steve Davis. This has been a PathNotes Proprietary Limited production.